There comes a point when you realize life doesn't need to make sense anymore. Not because confusion has disappeared, not because understanding has arrived, but because the need for things to line up has quietly fallen away. This episode is about that moment, about what it's like when experience no longer needs coherence in order to be lived fully. Earlier in life and earlier in this journey, making sense of things felt important. Understanding gave orientation. Meaning gave stability. Explanations made life feel navigable. And for a long time, that mattered. Sense-making helped you move through uncertainty. It allowed you to place events in context, to understand reactions, to see where you stood. But eventually, that constant organizing becomes unnecessary. Not wrong, just no longer required. When nothing needs to make sense, experience feels lighter. Not because it's clearer, but because it's no longer being arranged. You're not trying to understand what's happening in order to allow it. You're allowing it because it's happening. This can feel unsettling at first. If meaning once provided grounding, its absence may feel like freefall. But very quickly, you notice something unexpected. Nothing collapses. Life continues without explanation. When nothing needs to make sense, questions don't disappear. They simply stop demanding answers. Questions can exist without resolution. They don't pull attention. They don't interrupt experience. They're just movement. Earlier, unanswered questions may have felt heavy, like loose ends. Now, they don't carry weight. They don't need to close. When nothing needs to make sense, emotion feels different. Emotion doesn't need to be understood to be felt. You don't ask why it's here. You don't need to justify it. It arises, moves, and fades. Earlier, emotion often came with interpretation. What does this say about me? Why is this happening? Now, emotion doesn't require a story. It doesn't need context. It's experienced directly. This doesn't make emotion dull. It makes it clean. Without interpretation, emotion completes itself. When nothing needs to make sense, thought loses its organizing role. Thoughts still appear. Ideas still arise. But they're no longer responsible for explaining reality. They're optional. Earlier, thought may have acted like a map. Now, it's just movement. Sometimes useful, often unnecessary. This brings a quiet simplicity. Not because life is simple, but because it's no longer being translated. Experience isn't filtered through meaning. It's lived directly. When nothing needs to make sense, time also changes character. Moments don't feel like parts of a story. They don't build toward a conclusion. They arise and dissolve without narrative. Earlier, time may have felt directional, past leading to future. Now, time feels more open, less linear. This doesn't mean memory disappears. It just stops organizing identity. Memory becomes functional rather than definitional. When nothing needs to make sense, identity loosens further. You don't need to understand yourself. You don't need to define who you are now. You're allowed to be inconsistent. You're allowed to change without explanation. Earlier, identity may have been shaped by making sense of experience. Now, experience doesn't need to point back to anything. This can feel deeply relieving. You don't have to reconcile yourself. You don't have to arrive anywhere. When nothing needs to make sense, relationships feel different. You're not trying to understand others. You're not interpreting interactions. You're simply responding. This doesn't make connection shallow. It makes it immediate. There's less projection, less assumption. When nothing needs to make sense, conflict doesn't escalate internally. You don't try to figure out who's right. You respond to what's present. And when it's done, it's done. Earlier, conflict may have triggered analysis. Now, it stays situational. When nothing needs to make sense, silence feels complete. Silence doesn't invite interpretation. It doesn't feel empty. It doesn't need meaning. It's simply space. This stage doesn't feel profound. It feels ordinary, quietly ordinary. You may notice that you speak less about experience. Not because you're withdrawn, but because explanation feels unnecessary. Words arise when useful. Otherwise, there's no need to name what's happening. When nothing needs to make sense, effort softens further. You're not trying to align experience with understanding. You let experience lead. This doesn't make life passive. It makes it responsive. You act when action is required. You rest when it isn't. No justification needed. When nothing needs to make sense, mistakes don't demand explanation. They're noticed, adjusted, released. No narrative attached. Earlier, mistakes may have required meaning. Now, they're just movement. This stage often arrives quietly. There's no realization, No moment of insight. Just a gradual noticing that you're no longer trying to understand life. You're living it. You may still look for meaning sometimes. Habits linger. But when it happens, it doesn't take over. It passes. This isn't something to practice. It's something that remains when the need for explanation has fallen away. When nothing needs to make sense, life doesn't feel chaotic. It feels free. You don't need to remember this. You don't need to agree with it. If it resonates, you'll notice it in your own moments. If it doesn't, nothing is missing. Life doesn't require coherence to unfold, and you don't need to understand it to live it fully. If any of this feels familiar, you don't need to hold on to it. But if you'd like to stay connected, you're welcome to. Liking the video helps it reach others who may be quietly realizing that life doesn't need to make sense. And if these reflections support you as experience unfolds without explanation, you can subscribe, not to follow a path, but to keep the door open. And if someone you care about has been trying to understand everything and feels tired from the effort, you're welcome to share this with them. Only if it feels natural. Sometimes the deepest peace comes from realizing nothing needs to make sense at all.